This next session really is about different kinds of families, and we'll be hearing from Laura Dewar, I hope I've said that correctly, Laura, the policy officer at Gingerbread, and Keela Shackell-Smith, the diversity inclusion manager at the Cabinet Office and founder of Cross Government Women's Network. They'll be talking about alternative families and providing support to all kinds of families. And I'll say some brief things after they've both spoken about thinking about adopted and fostering families and the specific emotional and challenges that they might be coming up against. So Laura, I think we're over to you first.
Thank you, Claire. So I'm going to be talking about flexible working and single parents, and particularly the theme that I know that you want to discuss today, which is about building better and how we might actually do things after the COVID crisis. So what I'm going to talk about are facts and figures about single parents, employment for single parents prior to COVID, what that looked like, and what we know about single parents' employment as a result of the COVID crisis, what needs to change, and the role of employers and government, and really rethinking flexible working after the COVID crisis and what that might look like. So, as Claire said in my introduction, I work for Gingerbread, which is the national charity for single parent families. And we support single parents through our advice and information. We have a helpline and membership and groups across England and Wales. And we also do policy and research and campaigning, and that's a bit of the organisation where I work. And I wanted to start by hopefully dispelling some of the myths that people might have about single parents, which is that the average age for a single parent is 39, and less than 1% of single parents are teenagers. Before the COVID crisis, 69% of single parents were in work, but single parents are more likely to get stuck in low paid work than other workers. So in terms of numbers, 1 in 5 families with children are headed by a single parent. And those single parents, 9 out of 10 of them are women. And children in single parent families are almost twice as likely to be in poverty than those in couple parent families. So in terms of flexible working prior to COVID, I did 2 research reports which were published in November last year and earlier in February this year, which were looking at the impact and single parents and in-work progression. And although those were dealing with in-work progression, they also gave us quite a good indication of how things were currently working for single parents in terms of flexible work. So single parents are much more likely to work part-time. 30% of single mothers work part-time. And I think as well, it's interesting how they get into that part-time work. So from the parents that I spoke, one of the parents that I spoke to in the in-work progression report talked about, I wanted to work part-time, but it's very difficult to, unless you've had that job prior to going on to maternity leave. And we know from the figures that single parents who become single parents when their children are a baby or very young, that tends to be a pinch point for when they fall out of the job market. And so actually they are much more reliant, single parents overall are much more reliant on advertised job vacancies than negotiating part-time hours coming back from maternity leave. So Timewise do a flexible work index, which shows the dire shortage of advertised flexible jobs. And also, I think what's quite interesting about their index is they show that flexible work is much more common in low paying jobs and those where very high paying jobs. So that bit in the middle is where there is a real lack of flexibility. So for instance, a job paying under 20k full-time equivalent, 23% of jobs are advertised with some flexibility. But if you go up to the next level, to between 20k and 34 full-time equivalent, this drops back to only 14%. So, and also the right to request, the current right to request legislation is only available, you can only tap into that when you've been employed for 6 months or more. And so the combination of these factors lead many single parents to make very restricted but very understandable choices about the jobs that they move into. And I suppose, and I came across lots of examples from my research and on my work progression, and I'm just going to talk about Barbara, and actually she's quite sort of typical of lots of parents that I interviewed. So she had a degree in business, and prior to having her son, she worked in a management job for a bookmakers. And since having her son, she works in a reception as a receptionist in the school. And you might say that people, talk about the mummy track of jobs and whether this is also an issue for mothers and couples. And I say it is an issue for mothers and couples, but not to the same extent. And they show that in my next. So this next slide looks at educational levels and occupational groups. And what that is showing, that despite having qualifications, say at level 3 or 4, so A levels or level 4 and above is degrees and above, that despite that, they are more likely than couple mothers and couple fathers to not move into the higher occupational groups. They're much more likely to stay in the bottom 6 occupational groups. So that's sort of looking back prior to the COVID crisis. And I suppose what happened with the COVID crisis, we're all aware of the dramatic change in flexible working, sort of overnight. People told, huge swathes, millions of people were told to work from home, which has been positive in some ways and has shown that lots more jobs can be done in a flexible way than were first thought. But I don't think that is that's only available to people who can do their job from home. So it's very variable on the sector in which people work. And also, I think worrying from the figures that the Office for National Statistics produced earlier this week, the employment levels for those that work part-time have really plummeted. And that is going to be, obviously that's one form of flexible working, but particularly important for those who've got younger children. So promoting flexibility for single parents is going to look different for different sectors. This looks like, this table is, I appreciate, has lots of figures in it. I'm just going to draw your attention to the first sort of 3 bands of this diagram, which was produced by the Resolution Foundation. And this shows the type of work that single parents and all parents are doing. And this diagram shows that actually working from home, the 27% of single parents were working from home during the pandemic, compared to 36% of all parents. And that actually a lot of them, a higher percentage of them are in lockdown sectors, and a higher percentage working as key workers. And obviously key workers is a very broad category of workers. So on the positives in terms of single parents' experience of home working, I'm currently doing 2 projects on the impact of COVID on single parents. And one of them is looking at those that worked and cared during the crisis, and another one's going to be looking at those who lost their jobs. So I'm going to do some quotes from our one where we looked at single parents working from home. And there were some real positives about it, some real positives, particularly where employers gave autonomy to those single parents as to how they did their job. So Meredith spoke about her employer being really supportive and flexible, and Kelly talked about actually the decreased costs of working from home and her petrol costs, and also going forward after COVID, that single parents talked about the possibilities of home working being really positive for them in terms of being able to potentially do more hours. And also parents talked to me about they wouldn't be so stuck by the locality of a job. So there's quite a number of single parents who will choose to work locally in terms of the logistics of looking after a child on their own. And so again, the point that home working could really open up possibilities to a lot of parents going forward in terms of the jobs that they could go for. But there are obviously concerns about social isolation. With many single parents were interviewed that working at home at least some of the time would make sense, but they also needed to feel kind of connected to organisations. So again, those people that thrived more from working from home had that from employers. And like I say, I was sort of impressed across the amount of employers that had been very supportive to the parents. And some parents, including Lily, talked about having potentially a mix of home working and going into the office, going forward. And Working Families, a charity that we work with, have surveyed employers, and they found that actually productivity has either stayed the same or has improved as a result of home working. So I think home working within the whole mix of flexible working is a positive for single parents. But like I say, it's only going to be applicable for some parents. It's not the complete solution. So what about those single parents who can't work from home? Well, I think, again, I think there's such a role for employers. I think there was some really good research that happened in the years, in recent years by Timewise. They did some work with about moving up in retail. So they did a project with a shop, chain of shops called Pets at Home, which you might be familiar with. They had a real problem with, they had a really steady workforce on the shop floor, but they had at management levels, they had quite a churn of people leaving. And so they wanted to increase their pipeline of talent within people from their shop floor, who tended to be women who didn't work full time. And they did a fantastic project with Timewise and Pets at Home, and have increased, and they have sort of changed their structure as to how people can move up in that organisation. And Timewise have also done similar work with the NHS. NHS has had real difficulty in recent years with nurses wanting to work part-time, but they're not being sufficient jobs being advertised in that way, and lots of bank nurses as a result, which is very expensive for the NHS. So actually they were brought in to address this problem. And again, with teacher shortages in secondary schools, they were brought in to do a project to try and improve flexible working within schools. So I think what's interesting about those projects is that it's not just about making things better for the potential for making things better for single parents and other parents with these projects, but they were about improving the bottom line for employers in terms of that flexibility, working well for their employers. So another thing that employers can do is look at how they advertise jobs. So Working Families have who have organised this week, Work-Life Balance Week, And they've also produced something called Happy to Talk Flexible Working Strapline, which employers can use in their job advertising. So that's a kind of way that you can show that there's flexibility in a role. Again, the bottom line for employers is you're going to get a wider pool of potential applicants for roles. But I would also argue that there needs to be a step before that where employers are really looking at job design and how a job might be done differently before you actually advertise that role. And going back to the in-work progression research that I did, I was really struck by the role of employers, both individual line managers, and I think there's a real role for individual line managers, but also the ethos of organisations and how they're run. And I was sort of struck to one of the women that I interviewed. She worked for the NHS, and I interviewed her on the in-work progression as part of the in-work progression research. And she said to me, "Oh, I mentioned it to my line manager that I'd been interviewed by Gingerbread about progression." And her manager went, "Yes, and I think you need to think about progressing in work. Look, let's talk about how you might do that." So again, it's stopping single parents being stuck in because they have got a flexible job that's working for them, to also think as an employer that those staff might have the skills and have the aspiration to move up, and you need to have those conversations. And again, with the in-work progression research, I was really struck by the role of mentoring and programs of support that really have really helped single parents. I was struck by a parent called Shan, who went on the Leadership Plus program. So she became a single parent when her son was a baby, and she wasn't returning to a job, and she was looking to sort of keep her skills. She was at a management level, and she went on the Leadership Plus program, and they helped her negotiate with a previous employer who was a charity about going to do some project work for them. And they were so sort of impressed with her sort of plans, they actually made her job a job share. And so she's been able to go back to work and go back at a level that she can support herself and her son, and really keep at that level and not drop down by doing part-time hours. But I also think there's got to be a greater role for government, as we see the employment levels are obviously rising. And there's going to be more single parents who are on universal credit and will be obliged to look for work as a condition of receiving universal credit. And I think there just needs to be a much greater role of a supportive and reskilling approach to the single parents that they see, that there isn't this rush to get into to any job that might not be sustainable or might not in any way reflect the skills or experience that some of these parents have. And I would urge the DWP and job centres to really think about these specialist support that can be provided for single parents. I know from my interviews the role of, in London, Successful Mums and the GROW programme, and what a difference that makes, especially in single parents thinking about not only the job that they might be doing now, but what job, how they're going to think about their future, and how they might build up their skills and experience. The government committed in the Queen's speech in December of last year to make flexible working the default, including how jobs are advertised, and giving greater protection for those in low paid work and the gig economy. And this was going to be wrapped up in the employment bill. But as with lots of legislation, this has just been delayed. It was consulted upon, and now it's going to be consulted upon again. And meanwhile, the COVID crisis is, we're in this pandemic, and there's going to be a real need for lots of people to get good flexible work, and so the delay to the employment bill is just it needs to happen. It needs to be prioritised. And including within that a reform to the right to request flexible working legislation, so that single parents have an earlier right to request to work flexibly, because waiting 6 months to request flexible working just is pushing single parents into a very small pool of restricted part-time work. But I also think that things just need to be done differently. And there needs to be much more work between the DWP and with employers. So, for instance, on their Find a Job site, much more imagination about how jobs could be designed and really help employers in delivering that. And working with employers to design jobs differently, and perhaps even incentivize job shares. So if a job needs to be done full time, helping employers to design jobs differently, but also financially incentivize that 2 people could perhaps do that job. So in conclusion, if we want to build better for single parents, we need to make working and caring work better for them. Prior to the COVID crisis, things were not ideal, and many single parents were working below their skill levels, which is a waste for them and the economy. And this in part is driven by a lack of flexible jobs. And the COVID-19 crisis has shown that a dramatic rethink of flexibility in work can happen overnight, and that this can increase productivity. Working from home has shown that many more jobs that had previously weren't thought possible could actually be offered on a flexible basis. Employers and the government should be ambitious in harnessing this to create a truly flexible by default economy. More flexible jobs need to be unlocked, including those jobs that cannot be done from home. Thank you.
Claire, just unmute your microphone.
Oh, I thought I did. Sorry, I said all of that stuff and I could only hear myself speaking. Okay, we've done quite well with the technical hiccups today, so far so good. So we'll try and carry on as smoothly as possible. Yes, I was just saying thank you to Laura to hearing that perspective from single parents, especially with some of the difficulties and challenges specific to those people, and also some of the structural ways in which they're not being supported. So thank you for raising their voice in this forum. Keela, I would like to now hand over to you. So I welcome Keela Shackell-Smith.
Well, hello. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, because I'm on my headset today. Well, okay, so I'm going to be talking about understanding the needs of same-sex parents. I would say that mine's from a very, it's from my perspective. Okay, so a little bit of a health warning today, that the thing I'd learned about parenting, and certainly around pregnancy, is that no 2 journeys are the same, no 2 labours are the same, no 2 parents are the same. So I'm just going to be very much speaking from my own perspective as a same-sex parent. So if we could just, would it be okay to pop my slide up, please? That would be wonderful if that's all right. Thank you so much. Well, thank you. So yeah, that's me, and that's Ali, and that's Reka at Pride. Oh God, it just seems so long ago with all those big crowds. But our daughter's actually a little bit older now. She's 2. It's my non-working day today, so I've just come back from splashing in muddy puddles. So it's been an interesting day so far. But I would say that it wasn't what we intended. So ideally, I would have carried Reka instead of Ali. Ali never ever wanted to be pregnant at all, and so but we didn't have any option in the end. So so Ali agreed to carry, but it wasn't our preferred option, I would say. So as I said, I'm going to be talking very much from our perspective, but please just understand that I'll be talking about, you know, understanding the needs of same-sex parents, but everybody's journey is different. Okay, so just to keep that in mind. Okay, so I'm going to go in time order. So is it okay if we go to the the next slide, please? So we've got a calendar there for fertility treatment. So same-sex couples go through lots and lots of different routes to become parents. We went through fertility treatment, and oh my gosh, I had no idea actually how hard it was. And it was actually only afterwards then other people said, oh yeah, well we've gone through fertility treatment, we've done this, we've done that. I was like, oh my gosh, like why didn't you tell me this before? So we chose to go through the route of fertility treatment with donor sperm, and I would say that Ali was like a star potential to be pregnant on paper, you know, absolutely phenomenal. As a geriatric mother as well, she loved being called a geriatric mother. She went through all manner of tests and it's like, yeah, great, everything was absolutely perfect. However, to become parents, it took us 5 attempts and 2 years and 2 operations as well. And I would say that if anyone on the call today is been through fertility treatment or knows somebody, it's hard, really hard. We were at one point, we were attending a clinic in London every other day. Our 4th attempt worked and then didn't. Everyone says it's a roller coaster, and oh, it is. And it was the toll on us, you know, mentally going up and down, up and down. The thing I will say though, and why this relates to work, is that nobody knew. So we had 2 years of operations, appointments, that we actually did all of that through flexible working, through annual leave. We couldn't tell anyone, so not a single person knew of the treatment we were going through. So, and I would say that this story is quite common with a lot of friends who are also same-sex parents. So my top tips for understanding the needs of same-sex parents, specifically about fertility treatment, is, you know this, just don't make assumptions. Everyone's journey to pregnancy is different, and sometimes it's incredibly hard. Like us, many hide their fertility treatment as well. And actually, I'm looking back, that's really hard for my line manager to have supported me during that time by giving me, you know, the option to work from home or something like that, because, well, I never told him. So that's really hard. So I was like, how can we help people more going through fertility treatment if they haven't disclosed that? So what I would say, that if somebody does disclose to you that they are going through fertility treatment, I'd, you know, in a different pre-COVID world, I would suggest, you know, working from home and just being really considerate of that roller coaster, but being really considerate about flexible working. And I would say the flexible working that I had in the organisation I was in at the time was absolutely phenomenal, and that's what meant we could go to all of our appointments. And again, just understanding that emotional roller coaster as well. But fertility treatment is, you know, a lot of same-sex couples go through this same journey, and it's not easy. So it's definitely take that into consideration. And then if we could go to the next slide, please. Shared parental leave. Wow. Oh my gosh, it took me a long time to get my head around this. So we decided to take shared parental leave. So as a same-sex couple, or just actually as a couple, we are very keen on equality of home life, but I mean like hyper keen on equality of everything that we do, even down to like cleaning. We're not very good when we're not equal. So we decided that we were going to have shared parental leave. We were going to take 6 months each, so exactly 6 months. What we didn't think through is that babies aren't born on the day that they're due. Like, yeah, we didn't think that one through. So in Ali, as Ali was commuting to London at the time, it was just, it was on that heat, you know, that really, really hot weather 2 years ago as well. And so she had finished 4 weeks before, and then Maker was 2 weeks late, which meant that in the end, I had way more shared parental leave than Ali did because of how it works. So that went a bit pear-shaped. So our equality, we intended to have it as 50-50, but it didn't work out that way in the end. But what I would recommend is, I do know a lot of same-sex couples who have also done shared parental leave. I know lots who've actually, you know, taken full maternity leave. But what I would say, if anyone is considering shared parental leave, or if you work in HR and you're trying to explain shared parental leave, blocks. This was a game changer for me when somebody said, work it out in blocks. And I was like, okay. And actually just move the blocks around to work out, when is it maternity leave? When is it shared parental leave? When do you get paid, you know, statutory maternity pay? When do you get paid this? When do you get paid that? And it was just blocks, and I was just moving them around. And that was just such a game changer for me to work that out. So that would be my definite top tip. If you're ever trying to work out shared parental leave, it's so complicated. Write it on a bit of paper, blocks, and just move them around to what's going to work for you. Sorry, excuse me. But I would say as well, from a same-sex couple perspective, is that I'm very conscious of language, and in all of the shared parental leave paperwork, all of the language was gender neutral, and I thought that was absolutely phenomenal in what I needed as well. I think if I read any of the documents and they weren't gender neutral or referring to fathers, it would have really got to me. But actually, all of the forms, the letter that I received on shared parental leave, everything the organisation did was completely gender neutral, and I was like, that is brilliant. So we did take shared parental leave. My top tips of understanding the needs of same-sex couples and family-friendly organisations is just, you know, it was mentioned before about the awareness of shared parental leave. You know, 1% take it was absolutely woeful. But, you know, even in our antenatal group, I asked them, you know, none of you taking shared parental leave? None of them had even heard about it. And I was like, why is your HR not even suggested it as an option? And then they came back with, yeah, but I don't want to give away my maternity leave because I earned it. And that was a very interesting response. And I was like, oh, okay. So there's a lot of inequality in that response. Yeah, so I think the awareness of it is shocking. But I am such an ambassador for it. Honestly, I loved shared parental leave. But definitely what I would recommend, if you do work in HR and somebody's is just struggling to get their head around it, certainly when you go from statutory pay down to like no pay if you take the full year, is to do it in blocks. I would very, very recommend doing that. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. The importance of language, and I would really recommend this if you're a line manager or if you work in HR. You know, in the media, you know, in our world, mums and dads, you know, it's a term that's actually said so easily. In our antenatal group, a teacher was phenomenal. So right from day one, as soon as we walked through the door, and actually she admitted afterwards that she didn't even know we were a same-sex couple before we went to antenatal because of Ali's name. And so she was like, as soon as I saw you and you walked through the door, she said, I changed my language completely. So for the whole course, she always said birth mother and partner. And that was so incredibly important. And I asked her afterwards, I was like, did you do it all the time? Like say birth mother and partner. She was like, no, I've never done that before. And I was like, do you know how much that meant to me? And it gives me goosebumps even thinking about it, that actually she did it so well as well. Not once did she change her language back into say, you know, mums and dads. And that was really, really amazing. And actually the importance of language for same-sex couples, I can't stress how important it is to use the right language when you're talking about parenting and workplace policies and stuff like that. I would recommend you make sure you use the right language. And the right language to use is picking up on the language that other people use. The language, as I said, from our antenatal about birth mother and partner was just worked for us so well. People get it wrong though as well, and so as I said, we didn't actually tell anybody about in fact we didn't tell anyone about the pregnancy either, apart from at work. You know, people then notice after a little while, but we actively didn't tell anyone, and it's only afterwards, again with the importance of language and parenting, especially same-sex parents, is when people say dad instead of donor. And I can't tell you how offensive that is to say dad instead of donor. They are completely different things. If you really want to upset a same-sex couple, then say dad instead of donor. Language has a big impact. So I would definitely recommend, if you are working with same-sex parents, is to use the right language and know what language to avoid. Especially, and pick up the cues from people. I would say that there's something that also gets my goat, and that's the term paternity leave. So I was entitled to paternity leave. I wasn't so keen on that terminology, actually. It really got to me. But language, I would definitely recommend looking at language, whether it's on forms, if you work in HR, in policies, or the language you use when you speak to people as well, because it's so important. Let's go on to the next slide, please. Feeding. Oh, so as I said, we took shared parental leave. We actually chose to do combination feeding, so breastfeeding and formula and bottles. It wasn't liked at all. We just went on the grounds of fed baby, happy baby. It worked for us, and it worked for us because I knew that I was going back to work after 6 months, and Ali knew she was going back to work after 6 months, and we wanted to keep going with breast milk, and we really needed a way to do that. So Reka needed to easily switch between breastfeeding and bottles. So therefore we chose combination feeding, and it worked for us. I know it doesn't work for everybody, but yeah, I know it doesn't work for everyone, but we were lucky, and it was important to our family to do that. I would say at the time, which was absolutely brilliant of Ali's work, was because they knew about combination feeding. She was then able to work from home after the 6 months, because her work realised that actually it was very different to other families where she was coming back to work earlier. She did still want to breastfeed, so she was able to work from home for that time after returning to work, and that was so important, definitely for feeding. So I would definitely recommend that if you're having a same-sex couple returning and they're doing combination feeding like us, then I would definitely recommend home working, certainly for a few months after returning to work. Then if we go on to the next slide, please. And this is a confession now, partner mental health. Again, so this is my story, but I started declining after a few months went on, not with my relationship with my daughter, just a lot of things happened. So my mum died very unexpectedly one day. My friends had an angel baby. My dog died a couple of weeks after that. Everything was all at the same time, and my mental health was declining. And that's when I realized that actually it was very different in this same-sex couple world, because actually for birth mothers there is a lot of support on postnatal depression, and I really needed to find out about partner mental health, and more specifically I needed to find out about partner mental health from a same-sex perspective. if you've not read any articles, I would really recommend, if you're supporting anybody who is a same-sex parent, to look up articles about partner mental health for same-sex couples. That's what I did, and I would really, really recommend that, because actually it is different for same-sex couples. And I've read some brilliant blogs, and it was exactly how I was feeling. And what worked for me was mindfulness and the Headspace app. But if you are in HR, I would definitely recommend looking at partner mental health from a same-sex couple perspective. And then my last slide, going back to work, and there's a coffee cup on that slide because it just reminds me of that first day I went back, and I had a coffee, and then I had a lunch break for an hour, and I genuinely sat there. I was like, what do I do? I don't know. And actually for couples, and this is more for shared parental leave rather than same-sex couples, of course, you go back to work twice. So Ali found it really, really hard to go back to work after 6 months. It wasn't so much of an impact for me, I would say, just because of who we are. But we had a buffer zone actually between Ali and I, so that because it was really, really tough on Ali to go back to work and to hand over that we call them primary carer or secondary carer when we were on shared parental leave, and that's when we switched at 6 months. But I would say have a buffer zone. That would definitely be my recommendation. And we also did this thing where every weekend I would take Reka out on my own, so I could learn the ropes as well. So yeah, going back to work, I won't say that was specific for same-sex couples, but certainly for anyone on shared parental leave, you do go have that transition twice, and it's hard. So to close, I think that's my last slide, isn't it? But my top tip. So the theme is understanding the needs of same-sex couples. I would please understand the journey, and this is for all couples, but same-sex couples are very highly likely to have gone through fertility treatment, and we know how hard that is. So just understand, and really appreciate that journey is hard, and they probably didn't tell you about that journey as well, like we did. We didn't say about fertility treatment or the pregnancy. Well, until we had to tell work. Really look into shared parental leave. I know a lot of same-sex couples who do share parental leave, but I would recommend those blocks, as I said. Just please know the language to use and the language to avoid. For example, donor versus dad. As I said, for us, feeding and combination feeding worked for us as a same-sex couple. And please research partner mental health from a same-sex couple perspective, because it is different. And at the end of the day, I would say that, we all know that pregnancies and families are all different, and that is the exact same for same-sex parents as well. So we're all different too. So it's just understanding that in that we're all individuals. And that's me. Oh, Claire, you're on mute.
I keep clicking it and it keeps on coming on. Thank you so much, Keela, for opening up some of your own experiences, your personal experiences, and some of the things that you found challenging, and also some of sort of direct practical pointers about how to support people in your position whilst also keeping an eye on difference and diversity within difference and diversity. So really appreciate you bringing that to the fore. We're going to do some Q&A in a little while, so please stay on the line, and yourself, Laura. But I'm just going to talk a little bit about my knowledge and understanding of working and being with adoptive and foster parents, which isn't a personal experience for me, but a professional one. And really, I'm going to be speaking about it from a sort of psychological and emotional well-being perspective about some of the challenges that can come up in adoptive and foster families. So I haven't got a presentation or a slideshow. I'm not going to throw lots of stats at you, but I just really want to sort of give a bit more of a window into some of the challenges that can present, but not always, but can present themselves for those particular families. So as previously mentioned in my opening comments, family-friendly policies and flexible working policies give parents the support and flexibility they need to raise healthy, happy children, which benefits parents, kids and society as a whole. And that's been well talked about and referenced today. When we heard from Matt and his experience about being at home with his children, well, his little one, you really saw the impact that it had with regards to his bond with that child. And he spoke very well about how this was quite a very impactful experience, but also it revealed a lot. There was more empathy and more understanding in the house as a whole. So special consideration needs to be made for those families with fostered or adopted children. And this really is only serving as a brief introduction to this complex topic. I'm just going to outline some of the factors that need to be considered when supporting those families. And there is a widely held understanding that something quite drastic must have happened to a child to be separated away from their biological parents, and that the separation alone is a great difficulty in itself. So it doesn't really, or it's not really always about so much what has happened already in a child's life, but it is that and also the separation. So to further understand this, it's useful to consider how humans develop as a whole. So as children develop from conception to adulthood, they need support from those responsible, to protecting them during this journey, to protecting them on their life's journey. When going through the various stages in this developmental process, their experience of attachment plays an absolutely crucial role. So attachment is the profound and deep connection established between a child and caregiver in the very early years of life. It's an ongoing process throughout life, but there's something about how something is a foundation in those early years. It's a basic human need to be attached, and a child with secure attachments, which is just having good enough parenting, doesn't have to be perfect, it lays the foundation that so they can form a sense of themselves as lovable, worthy and capable in the world. So children need a relationship, with a caregiver who is sensitive and responsive, who comforts the child when distressed and enables them to feel safe enough to relax, to play and to learn. And that this is the very basis of secure attachment. Keela has already spoken very well about shared parental leave and how important it was that they both had that time at home. And anyone who has that shared parental leave will hopefully speak to that in the way that Keela and Matt previously did. And so it's about time. Children spell love T-I-M-E. And this is very much a crucial factor for adoptive and fostered parents. So attachments are formed during those early times, even in the context of adversity. So attachment foundations are laid down during this time, but with consistent relational experiences with other caring adults, new possibilities are possible for those who have had a difficult start. So developing a secure attachment with a substitute carer with a new family is key to improving outcomes to these children. And obviously this needs to be well supported. This is often not an easy, as the behavioural and emotional strategies children who have had a tricky beginning use to protect themselves. So often puts them at risk of being rejected by others and can affect all of their relationships. Although it's known that some younger children with a history of difficulty, neglect, maltreatment can respond quite quickly to changes in their emotional environments and fitting in with their new families and feeling secure. But research and experience also tells us that this isn't always the case. Some find it just too hard and unfamiliar to accept support, to continue to distrust adults and seem unable to seek care or comfort when distressed, relying on themselves. And we know that what really matters and benefits children greatly is that if they can have that time with their new families, with their adoptive or foster parents, to really get that good relational moments and those good and secure attachments off the ground. And to enable this, for those with attachment or trauma issues. And in order to ensure that young people with attachment issues are cared for most effectively during foster placements or in their adoptive families, regular training and support is often needed to help carers and so that they can reflect on a child's behaviour with support and with reference to the need that is being cried out for, rather than to react immediately to the behaviour. And this takes time and is often emotionally very, very challenging. So these attachment issues, this is a phrase which is used to describe a variety of behaviours which may arise as a child whilst they have lost their family of origin. So children become overly anxious to please, desperate to do anything to avoid being abandoned, and some express their chaotic feelings in chaotic behaviour, and others turn in on their own pain and withdraw, unable to relate to others. So when a child has experienced this, it can isolate them if we try and control their behaviour, and usual sort of naughty step or timeout parenting strategies don't really work with these children, and because they feel even more shame and feel even more worry and concern that they're going to be neglected or abandoned. And such children then can then completely dysregulate and get flooded with feelings of anger and rage and shame and absolute fear. So these children then can demonstrate very frequent outbursts of rage and anger as a reaction to this. And any attempt to further impose control can feel very threatening to these children and very frightening. Therefore, adopted and fostered children and their parents face unique emotional challenges. And for many of these families, this involves the parents learning intentional, new therapeutic approaches to parenting, which are generally not required for other families and for birth parents. So therapeutic parenting involves seeking to understand the complexity of these children's inner worlds and what is driving their behaviour, and how to respond to these emotions in a calm, receptive and assertive and accepting way, rather than just punishing them. Carers will need to remember that these children are often stuck in their emotional stage, often stuck at a younger developmental stage when the distress happened, and need handling with care and sensitivity. And again, all of this can take time with regards to attending courses, take time with regards to practicing this at home, and take time away from feeling resourced, and can really start to have a negative effect on the parent's own well-being. So if trauma and attachment issues have affected the child, it can impact the whole family, other siblings as well. And sometimes the parents can be drawn into responding negatively because they are at loss of what to do, or feel maxed out or burnt out. They can feel it's their fault they're not doing a good enough job, and feel incredibly guilty. So yeah. The behaviour could be labelled as relentless attention seeking. And again, thinking about language, it's really important that we start to understand what might be happening in these families, because it's more accurately described as attachment seeking, as the child desperately seeks safety and security in what seems like a very dangerous world to them. A young person may even seem settled, happy and thriving in their new foster or adopted family environments. But one of the triggers that can disrupt all of this is the onset of puberty. The stresses and the confusion of the young person during this time and their teenage years can pose problems in terms of changing behaviour and reacting to the past trauma or difficulty that they've been through. So a teen's early experiences of mistrust and inappropriate attachment and confusion about relationships can make them vulnerable to other outside influences, which again becomes another very sensitive area that needs a lot of time and dedication and relational moments to keep them safe and secure and bonded with their families. So it's not just the early stages of the pre-adoptive or foster process that need to be supported, but also the early years and throughout their life. Potentially if they're coming into the families with these issues. It's a complex and a delicate process that often many people realise, but with help and guidance, it can be the most positive, life-changing experience for both the family and the child coming into their family. So it is important that parents with looked after children get appropriate support to promote those healthy attachments, and to feel welcomed, accepted, and free of judgment in the role that they have, and really including their family, whatever makeup of their family there might be. So those are my comments on adoptive and foster families. And now we'll go to some Q&A and some comments, which I've seen have already come through on the text. So there's a question here from Kelechi to Laura about some managers' perception and understanding about flexible working is very poor and often doesn't go beyond job share and part-time work. What do you suggest is the best way for organisations to explore more creative types and methods of flexible working that meet the needs of various types of families in the workforce? I can see you've put something in the chat there, but I don't know if everyone can see it, Laura. Could you speak to that again?
Yes, I mean, I mentioned in my talk about the charity Working Families. So they do really good work, and so I'd really recommend their website. And employers can become members as well, and they do really good webinars, but they also do good free stuff. So it's National Work-Life Balance Week, so I know they've done a series of webinars, which I'm sure they will keep details of those and information from Work-Life Balance Week, but also their research reports I think are really good examples of how people do work differently and how it has worked. I seem to remember an example of 2 diplomats who job shared, and they've got their really good wealth of information about how people have done things differently and how it's worked, and importantly how it's improved the bottom line for lots of organisations in doing that.
Lovely, thank you, Laura. And Keela, there is a question here about language, and just asking what alternative would you recommend for paternity leave? So a really practical question.
Yeah, this was actually something my organisation looked into. So the one I was in previously looked into before I had my paternity leave, and actually we call it parental leave. That's what it is. It's parental leave. But the thing is, I know that paternity leave is the legal definition. So yes, it is called paternity leave in HR systems. That doesn't mean a letter has got to go out to that individual that says paternity leave. Actually change the language or put it in brackets to say parental leave, brackets. I'd even accept that, but it's just parental leave, it's parental leave, and that's what it should be called. But I know it's a legal definition, but yeah, I can't change that. But we could change what we actually put in letters and things like that and how we talk about it.
So that personal touch, and to keep an eye on some of that, especially when there's a legal definition to work around. Thank you. Okay, so there's a question that came in earlier, and we had a few technical issues on the Q&A earlier on, so there was a couple of questions that got missed, but one of them was, do you think that the effects of the pandemic with so many people furloughed and made redundant will create a shift in employers thinking about people with gaps in their CV? Now, I know that doesn't necessarily talk exactly to your subject matters, but it does cover some of the difficulties, when going on shared parental leave and coming back to the workforce, and also if you're a single parent and you have to leave work because of your caring responsibilities. Is there anything you want to say to that?
Yeah, I think it is worrying, and I gave the figure. I sort of talked about the huge drop in part-time working that's happened. Just at and the figures are playing catch up. So that's in the summer. That isn't even reflect now. So I think the figures are going to become quite shocking in the level of unemployment. What worries me is that high unemployment. I don't want that to mean that employers then go back to old practices when they've just got huge swathes of people who can apply for work. And I really hope that some of the things that have happened that have been real improvements for families just aren't lost. But I think it will be short-sighted for employers. They need to get the best. They need to get the best candidates, and yeah, there will be gaps in people's CVs. But I think I think employers need to understand that that's going to be true. I think it's going to have touched so many people, so many millions of people, that I think that will be, employers will have to get used to it. And also I speak to single parents who have used the time during the pandemic to increase their skills on their own, to do online courses, to do things, so that their CV, they might not be working, but they're really using that time as best that they can. Obviously, they also need time for their children, but I'm really struck by the amount of people who are also doing that and improving their skills, so they're job ready for jobs that, it's not, the gap is filled by improving their skills.
Wonderful, thank you.